Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. The Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Ajay Bisaria, has returned to India days after Islamabad expelled him following its decision to downgrade diplomatic ties over the withdrawal of special status to Jammu and Kashmir. PTI, quoting sources, stated or said Bisaria is back in Delhi as Pakistan did not heed to India's request to review its decision to downgrade diplomatic ties. Pakistan has already made it clear that it will not send its newly appointed High Commissioner Moinul Haque to India. Haque was appointed to the post 3 months after the previous Pakistani envoy, Sohail Mahmood, took charge as Pakistan's Foreign Secretary. It is learnt that Ajay Bisaria left Islamabad on August 10th and arrived in New Delhi via Dubai. Pakistan on August 7th expelled Bisaria soon after deciding to downgrade diplomatic ties with India over what it called New Delhi's unilateral decision on Jammu and Kashmir. On this edition of India's World, we will take stock of the Indo-Pak ties after the abrogation of Article 370. Joining me on the program today are Dileep Singh, former ambassador, Professor Swaran Singh, School of International Studies, JNU, and Jaidev Ranade, Security and Intelligence Expert and former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. Your thoughts and your first reactions to Pakistan deciding to downgrade diplomatic ties with India.
Well, I must say I'm very amused with the kind of respect and love that Pakistan has shown for Article 370. I did not realize that Article 370 was there. Pakistan ever considered that to be a feature that had given Jammu and Kashmir a special status and therefore respected its autonomy. I have not come across any statement of Pakistan in that period between 1950-52 and the current abolition of it, stating that India respects the autonomous status of J&K. So all of a sudden, when India has scrapped this article, for Pakistan to go ballistic and declare that this is a total abrogation of the autonomy of J&K is very surprising. The other point is that if Pakistan has always maintained that whether it is terrorism or any other difficulty, India must maintain the dialogue with Pakistan. Now by sending ambassadors back and downgrading ties, I wonder how Pakistan will expect a dialogue to take place in this kind of an environment.
Absolutely. Professor, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So is Pakistan trying to build a false narrative surrounding Kashmir to try and send out a false message to the international community? What is the end game as far as Pakistan is concerned?
I think it's an existential issue for Pakistan. They have to first look at their limitations or their challenges that they have to survive as a nation and put the nation together. All 70 years, anti-India tirades have been the one kind of rhetoric which has kept the nation together. Meanwhile, during that process, a whole very powerful military has been built and which is usually in charge of decision making. Last 30 to 40 years, we have also noticed a whole non-state actors, outfits emerging within the nation. Now that process is going to be completely redundant if in case the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, ideally speaking, or the one which is in India's control is fully integrated with India. And we sooner or later establish peace and development in the region, the whole raison d'etre, the very reason for the state of Pakistan then gets under question. So politicians therefore have to make as much noise as possible, see possibilities of what they can get out of this rhetoric and justify their existence in that sense. So I think it's a kind of a challenge to the state as such, and therefore politicians are under compulsion to make that noise. But most of their politicians, you read their newspapers, are themselves saying that it's not going much, it's not going to really change things on the ground. And we notice that not only people inside Pakistan, media and others are commenting that it's only going to be largely a diplomatic effort to showcase that we are disturbed. And also outside, how many nations are really speaking for them? Look at the Muslim nations or look at the big powers other than China, which has shown certain amount of anxiety. And which I would see, because China itself is kind of under heat because Shaksgam Valley, which Pakistan had gifted to China in signing the border agreement between China, Xinjiang and Pakistan occupied Kashmir in 1963, about 5,200 square kilometers. That again is a kind of a problem area for them. They see that Indian map now again claims that region. So they feel obliged to really say something in return. I would say that, and partly because of their long-term relationship with Pakistan, is why China is making noise. But none of the others are really, most nations, if I have to look at the common denominator, are saying two nations should make sure regional tensions are controlled. Nobody is condemning India's action. And that is expected. I think it's going to be a long haul that we can make other nations gradually get to realize they have to live with it. And that's, I think, the aim that we should work at. And that is good enough because we don't expect all the nations to suddenly start speaking in India's favor and Pakistan's against Pakistan. So I think position at this stage is good enough for us to work on long haul process both internally and externally.
Sure. So a couple of aspects that I'd like to take forward with you, Mr. Ranade. One, of course, the professor spoke about how the local media is talking about how Pakistan is going to keep the diplomatic efforts up. Is it going to be limited to diplomatic efforts, or do you believe that there is something that is going to be planned on the border? That is one. Second, of course, the China angle. Now, let's not forget our foreign minister is in China as well, and Wuhan 2 is also likely to happen sometime this year. So how much will China back Pakistan as far as this particular issue is concerned?
Okay, so your first question about what Pakistan is likely to do. I would preface my remarks by saying that this action has actually rattled Pakistan. When I say rattled Pakistan, their political and military establishments have been rattled by the action because it follows the other strikes that took place after Uri and at Balakot. So they are now dealing with a country with India, which has gone in for decisive actions, which has made it clear that they are not going to respond to Pakistan's repeated pleas of talking to Pakistan or settling issues bilaterally. On certain issues which we consider to be internal, this government, I think, has demonstrated that they will go it on their own. So that is the first. Second, I think we must, or at least I would pay attention to the statements made, initial statements made by Imran Khan and by General Bajwa, who is the Pak Army Chief. There was a difference in their statements. Imran Khan's statement spoke about extending all kinds of support, and then he qualified them by saying diplomatic, economic, moral support to the Kashmiris in their so-called struggle, etc. Bajwa spoke about all kinds of support, and there is no doubt that they will try and now create problems inside J&K. A number of the terrorists who were already there have been neutralized or eliminated. Reports are that they are getting ready to pump in a larger number. In fact, today's newspaper talks about some Jaish-e-Mohammed modules already there. So I expect that they will try and push more people in and activate the people who are already inside J&K. So I do expect that they will try and make it a hot summer and continue that over the time. Your second question about China, I think it's clear that from the statement that China has made, two things become clear. One, it doesn't want to really sour the relations with India. At this point in time when Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are both under pressure from the United States and from domestic dissatisfaction, so they don't want to add another front. Yet they don't want to give up their claim on Ladakh specifically and J&K, which they have called disputed. Ladakh, the claim was reiterated in May 2013 when Li Keqiang came here for the first time as Premier of China. And recently on, I think it was 7th of August, there was a write-up, an article in Weixin, which is the Chinese version of the WeChat, which again sort of almost echoed in brief the earlier claim on Ladakh and said that hopefully sometime we will get it back. So their claim on Ladakh remains, which is why they have made that statement, in addition to what the professor pointed out about Shaksgab Valley and part of the district of Demchok. But I think the overall thing will be that they will back Pakistan. As they've said, they'll coordinate in the UN, which coordination has been going on for a long time, including on the nuclear deals that they had, the clandestine nuclear deals. So I think it won't go beyond that.
All right, all right. So, Ambassador, other than the subcontinent, or if you could just limit it to China and Pakistan, does the abrogation of Article 370 have any other external, international and foreign policy related dimensions?
No, in terms of how primarily the Western countries view the situation, is that they regard the line of control as a de facto border. That was the line taken by the US in the Kargil war when India sought American help in getting Pakistan to withdraw, and when India respected the line of control in the Kargil war. That was the interpretation drawn. And whatever India has done on its side of the line of control is treated by the Western countries as an internal matter of the country. And that is the line they have taken even now. The US has said that it's a strictly internal matter. Britain has made similar points. The only point of concern they have expressed...
There have been certain individuals, however, from the UK,
yes.
making, MPs.
Labour Party.
Yes,
the Labour Party
especially.
The Labour Party has, as you know, Labour Party support bases the Mirpuris in Great Britain. So they have made those. And then there have been some senators, perhaps in the US also. But the official policy is that as far as Indian administered Kashmir, or what we call J&K, is concerned, that is an internal matter of India. The only 2 points of concern that when they talk about concern is, one is that it should not lead to any kind of international tension with Pakistan. So that should be handled calmly and cautiously by both countries. Both countries should tone down confrontation. And the other is perhaps in terms of human rights violations. That should be respected. Now that is something that Western countries always maintain in their foreign policy statements. They have done that in the case of Hong Kong as well, where of course there are other international agreements also that have brought into question. So as far as the Western countries are concerned, that is a very clear position. China's position, of course, has been explained by Mr. Narde about what China's position is. Some of the UAE has come out in support.
I was just going to come to that. Were you surprised by that statement at all? Because the ambassador, UAE's ambassador to India, was one of the very first few people who came out openly in support of India's actions.
Yes, that's true. But again, our relations with the Arab countries has improved to a point where we are actually cooperating on counter-terrorism and in other areas as well. So that is one area where our foreign policy has successfully countered Pakistan's earlier policy of looking only at Islamic solidarity. So despite what the OIC keeps making those formal statements, that apart, our relations with Arab countries are extremely strong, and the Arab countries also realize that Pakistan's narrative in this is entirely prejudicial and has little substance.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the UN now. Professor, Pakistan has been trying to take this matter up with the Secretary General, but the Secretary General has very clearly stated that, this is a matter that needs to be settled on the basis of the Simla Agreement. So what is Pakistan trying to do by taking this matter to the UN, and what is it that they can achieve there?
I think that's clearly an assessment that General Secretary has of how this issue has repeatedly come up in United Nations. And the fact that he specifically mentions Simla Agreement is endorsement of India's policy. That's what India has been talking about, that it should be handled under Simla Agreement, which talks about peaceful and bilateral dialogue to be the way of resolving all issues that sort of come between India and Pakistan in relation to Kashmir. So I think it's already an assessment of what has happened and what might happen again. China has repeatedly been voicing, in favor of internationalizing Kashmir, except in Kargil war, when, remember, Chiang Samin had refused Nawaz Sharif of internationalizing, taking it to United Nations, and therefore Nawaz Sharif had to cut short his visit at that time. Of course, you could see that repeat happening of China speaking in favor. Russia for a long time was our pillar of support in United Nations. Now that, has to be worked on again. There are statements from Russia which are favorable, of course, but it's not the same kind of strong support that we used to have. Meanwhile, you see, France has come closer to India, which is another very important voice of a veto power holding nation at United Nations Security Council. So I think there is a little change among players' equations with India, but outcome will be very close to what General Secretary said, that it's not going to be really going anywhere. Even one country vetoing that kind of dialogue will put it in deep freezer again. More important is what is the locus standi of Pakistan to speak on behalf of Kashmir. I mean, it's important for us to now also make the world aware of history, legality, politics of it, because it's not really clearly understood by much of the world as to how complex that knot is. the whole Jammu and Kashmir province in totality is so diverse and so complex. History is so complex. What Pakistan did with what they got? They broke into three pieces. One part they gave to China. Other, the largest part, northern areas, they just usurped, said nothing about it. It was just not declared whether part of their occupied Jammu and Kashmir or not. It is only in 1974, indeed 1994 judgment of the Supreme Court of what they call Azad Jammu and Kashmir declared that northern areas are part of the claimed Jammu and Kashmir but are not part of what they call Azad Jammu and Kashmir. There were no national assemblies, no legislative assemblies for first 25 years. So they've been also tinkering, this whole part that they have occupied. And, it's very strange to see that they do call leaders of what they call Azad Jammu and Kashmir as President and Prime Minister, but all candidates contesting have to first sign in an allegiance to Pakistan saying that this Kashmir will be part of Pakistan. So they have been doing all kinds of strange things with the territories that they have been in occupation. So I don't understand what is their locus standi to now start talking of this Indian process of integration, where lots of promises are already made. Prime Minister has spoken of taking the development forward. Home Minister has spoken about maybe return of Jammu and Kashmir to full state. And we have been holding elections. I understand India's compulsion also, because over a period of time you see not only ISI but ISIS was becoming visible now in Kashmir. The fact that under that pressure, local two dominant parties were, one emphasizing on autonomy, other emphasizing on pro-independence ideas. And I think this was time that we had to really act upon. And now with the return of US and Pakistan getting closer again,
right,
this was very timely decision. And in that sense, how we play upon it in coming time, I think that is very crucial for us.
Okay. There's another dimension to the points that the professor was making as well, Mr. Ranade. The fact that Pakistan has changed the demography over the last 70 years as far as Gilgit-Baltistan is concerned. So do they have the right to complain now after what they've done for 7 long decades?
Exactly. But the game there is different. As far as they're concerned, they have, in fact, over the years, tried to keep POK Gilgit-Baltistan out of the scope of discussion and focused it only on the valley, in fact. The others somehow have got carried away, and I think the professor did say that we've got to give the correct picture, the history of the place, because it's got skewed. As far as the demography is concerned, they have been systematically working on trying to change the demographic balance in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. That has acquired impetus after 2013, after the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor came in, 2015 actually, in order to safeguard Chinese investments in this area. So a Gilgit official in fact said that this is being done to protect Chinese investments, and you'll notice that after that they have tried to bring in initially people from Gilgit-Baltistan as observers to their Federal Assembly, with plans to now have them elected. So it's a process of integration that they had started in fact much earlier. In India's case, we've always had democratic elections there. You may question, how fair or otherwise, but it's been reasonably fair, I would say. Yes, there has been problems, there have been violence, but there has been no attempt at changing the demography of that place. In fact, the effort has been to mainstream them with the rest of the country, which is happening even now. There are numerous cases of Kashmiris who come out of the state, who have worked in other parts of the country, who say that, we see how far in the rest of India has progressed. We have been left behind. So I think all these factors are there. And the fact that the pressure on India has increased since, again, 2015, the combined pressure from China and Pakistan on us, China's increasing territorial claims on Ladakh and the rest, J&K and Arunachal on us, I think made us realize that we have to take some steps immediately. And if you recall, on 6th of July, that the Dalai Lama's birthday also, there were Chinese troops who appeared in Koyul and held up posters saying, don't celebrate the Dalai Lama's birthday to the villagers of Koyul. So there are, actions like this, which also would have prompted the government to take steps, in addition to, as you said, the US coming closer to Pakistan to try and settle Afghanistan. Though I must add here that I don't think that relationship is going to be a long-term relationship. It will be tactical as far as the US is able to pull out of Afghanistan. So this is how I see the picture, that we were compelled to move ahead and take this action for two reasons. One, the development of J&K and to cool down the terrorism there, and secondly, to counter foreign pressure.
Absolutely. So the timing was absolutely perfect is what the panelists are suggesting, taking the discussion forward now. So Ambassador, so India, ever since Pakistan decided to downgrade diplomatic ties, always reached out to Pakistan and said, reconsider your decision, don't do this. But yet Pakistan has gone ahead, expelled our High Commissioner. The High Commissioner is now back in India. So what next?
You know, you asked this question about Pakistan trying to take this issue to the Security Council. Pakistan had talked about two. One was the International Court of Justice and the Security Council. This was what Imran Khan said in his National Assembly. ICJ, they dropped the idea because it has no jurisdiction in the matter. In the Security Council's mandate is very clear. It is only protecting or safeguarding international peace and security. So there has to be a peace and security implication. That clearly is not there because India is not threatening Pakistan in any way. The other is in extreme cases where human rights violations lead to large exodus of population. Their Security Council has intervened. Otherwise, the Security Council does not hold discussions on internal matters of countries, minor violations of human rights, etc. Because if it does that, then it will be taking into account human rights violations in other countries as well, including some permanent members like China. So Pakistan has to push the envelope to a point where it can claim that there is a threat to its security, and therefore the international community must get in. And that is why Imran Khan made that argument that there will be more Pulwamas in India, and because of Pulwamas, then India will do Balakots, and then there will be international peace and security threat. So he's trying to put that narrative that the sequence of events will be such that it will lead to Pakistan being threatened by India. He's even talked about now that once India has taken over J&K, now it will threaten Pakistan. It will change demography in Jammu and Kashmir, and then it will threaten Pakistan. I don't know how the two are related to each other. But that is the argument, that he's trying to build a case where he can say that international peace and security is being threatened, and therefore Pakistan needs to go to the Security Council, action to be taken. The other point, in the Security Council itself, we don't really need the veto today. When Western countries were against India in the early 50s and 1960s, we needed the Soviet veto. Today, Pakistan will have difficulty in getting 10 votes in the Security Council. There are countries of Asia and Africa who will not necessarily vote for Pakistan, vote against India. So even if Pakistan gets the support of a few countries like China, India may not need the veto at all, because Pakistan has to get at least 9 other votes apart from China. Where will it get those 9 votes from? So our position today is much stronger than it was in the 1950s and 60s.
Sure. So, Professor, there's another aspect in all of this which you haven't spoken about, that of the trade ties. Now, Pakistan has decided to suspend trade ties with India as well. What do you make of that decision?
It's a minuscule trade in that sense. I mean, it doesn't really make huge difference for India. If anything, it makes difference for Pakistan.
Yeah.
I think for Pakistan, it's not a good time to really ratchet up things with India. You look at their economy, look at the internal situation there. I think they may be feeling compelled to do that kind of rhetoric, but I don't think any sensible person in Pakistan would, even if you read the media there, they're not anticipating that they will take it as far as starting a war with India, because already they are really in search of foreign grants, help, investments to put their economy back on track. So it's bad time for Pakistan, but of course we should not also undermine the fact that the whole lot of inconvenience and panic that obviously has happened in Jammu and Kashmir could be a kind of a potential for trouble in that sense. So we have to really be, I'm sure state is doing that, National Security Advisor is traveling on the ground. So I think that is the only challenge that I notice. But rest of the rhetoric and noises are, shall I say, seasonal, and I think they will disappear over a period of time.
Sure.
India's stature is today very different. I mean, look at our economy is 9 times larger, and that partly explains UAE and several other West Asian nations which today share much stronger relationship with India than with Pakistan. So the equations are completely different. The timings are bad for Pakistan to start a war with India. India is obviously in no mood because we are being really scrutinized and observed around the world now. We are visible, and therefore I don't think it's good time for us to initiate any such trouble for us.
Right.
But on the ground, I think are real serious challenges that exist. And to me, it is going to be at least, look at earlier episodes, nuclear tests that India did. It took about 10 years to sort out things around the world and get accepted as a responsible state with nuclear weapons.
Sure.
So same is true here, both at international level and at domestic level. The complete integration, taking, sabka vishwas, may take 10 years. I mean, so it's going to be a constant process. Of course, in the initial stage, we have to be very careful to avoid any Pulwama type episodes happening on the ground.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Ranade, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on the best way forward for Indo-Pak ties.
Well, I think a lot of the effort will have to be on Pakistan's part. They'll have to reconcile themselves, if I may use the term, to what has happened. As was mentioned, the trade between us in any case is minuscule. It's under $2.5 billion. And most of it goes via a third country, which actually benefits the Pakistan army. So I wouldn't be surprised this ban on trade again sort of fills their coffers of the Pakistan Army Inc., as it's called. As far as talks are concerned, they're the ones who've been pleading with us for having talks. And we have told them very clearly, cool down on terrorism and only then will talks happen. They haven't done that. Now, what I anticipate looking ahead is two things. One, that terrorism in J&K, the Pakistanis will try and increase it. They will try and push in more people, either to create a very volatile situation there, an untenable situation, or to provoke us into reacting. Now, if we get provoked, it will be if there is a serious terrorist strike in India or in J&K, to which we feel, reaction is a must. And that will not really play into the hands of Imran Khan, as he says, threat of war. I think we'll be careful, like we were careful in the past.
Sure.
The second, I think others will try and, persuade Pakistan to improve its own economic situation, for which it has to get in touch with us. And I think in a short while, in a few months, Pakistan itself will feel that they need to start talking to us. And here I would put a lot of credence to the move by the government to declare the J&K and Ladakh as union territories, which actually frees the government into pushing development projects directly from Delhi and pumping in adequate funds. So I think you will start seeing, or we will start seeing, some development taking place there within 6 months to a year.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.